Please be advised this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Throughout history, tales have been told of beings that live in and around bodies of water, from fantastical sea monsters encountered by ancient mariners to ghosts that lure individuals to their watery graves. These stories evolved from humanity's need to define the unknown, to explain why tragedies occur. Like with all legends, they are adapted to reflect the changing world around us, and even today we seek to explain the inexplicable, to find answers to the mysteries, and in doing so, conspiracies are born. Each year, hundreds of people die from drowning. While many of these are tragic accidents, others are deemed to be either suspicious or unexplained. And this has led to rumours that there is something more sinister occurring. In the United States, these deaths have given rise to the belief that there is an individual or a group who are responsible for people ending up dying in bodies of water across the country. And this group mark the site of the murder with a symbol which has led to the killings being attributed to the smiley face killer. This is mirrored in the UK with what has become known as the Manchester Pusher, a mysterious figure who has been blamed for the deaths of numerous individuals whose bodies have been recovered from various waterways in and around the city. Today we'll take a look at the series of tragic deaths that have blighted the waterways of Manchester, leading some to speculate that there is an elusive figure stalking the night. But is the Manchester Pusher real, or is the real spectre the waterways of Manchester themselves? Before we explore some of the 70-plus cases that have fueled the theory of the Manchester Pusher, it is important to understand the other major factor in these cases, the rivers and canals themselves. Manchester is a thriving metropolis steeped in a rich history, which is reflected in its architecture, from the remnants of its industrial past to the iconic CIS building and monolithic Beetham Tower. These are symbols of the city's economic success and its continued growth, none of which would have been possible without the veins of the city, its waterways. Long before reliable road and rail networks, these canals and rivers helped bring prosperity, starting with the construction of the Bridgewater Canal in 1761, which was utilised to bring coal from the mines at Worsley eastward into the primarily undeveloped area of Castlefield, a site which within 100 years would become a bustling hub of mills and warehouses, as the city expanded with the boom of the Industrial Revolution. By this time, the Rochdale Canal had also been constructed. Having been completed in 1804, this canal arrived in the city from the north, and joined with the Bridgewater Canal at the Castlefield Basin. Another tributary would be the Ashton Canal, which fed into the city from the east. However, it would be the completion of the Manchester Ship Canal in 1894 that would help cement the city as the industrial powerhouse of the north. Now able to transport goods efficiently to and from Liverpool, the Ship Canal allowed for larger vessels to navigate the waterways, meaning it is also the deepest and widest of the city's canals. Aside from these man-made structures, the city is also intersected by three rivers: the Irk, which flows to the city from the west before merging with the River Irwell in the heart of the metropolis. The River Irwell is a tributary of the River Mersey and forms a natural boundary between the cities of Salford and Manchester. The third is the River Medlow, which rises approximately 10 miles north, near the town of Oldham, and also merges with the River Irwell upon reaching the city. Just like the Rochdale Canal, there are large portions of the Medlow that flow through tunnels hidden beneath the Manchester streets. As well as understanding the complex network of waterways that converge in the city, with their numerous connecting locks and junctions, it is also important to note that the metropolis itself is set 40 or more feet above these waterways, meaning that the primary means of accessing them from the street level is via steps. And as stated, some of these waterways are concealed beneath tunnels, or towering buildings have been constructed on either side of them with only narrow passageways between them to allow access to the water beyond. Not only are these waterways set below street level, they themselves hold hidden dangers, ranging in depths from between 20 to 30 feet. It is hard to visualise what lies beneath the gentle surface. However, in 2017, as part of a refurbishment of the gates at Deansgate Lock, a section of the Rochdale Canal was drained. This provided insight not only into how deep these channels are, but also revealed the years of debris and sludge that had built up beneath the surface over the years, including discarded bicycles, broken umbrellas and tree branches, all protruding from thick layers of mud. The sides of these feats of engineering consist of 2 layers. The lower part is carved by hand from the natural red sandstone that is common across Manchester. Upon this, several courses of stone blocks have been laid. These have been worn smooth by the gentle flow of water and boats brushing against them. Accessing the paths that run alongside these waterways, an individual may encounter graffiti-adorned underpasses and narrow towpaths, some of which are still constructed with flagstones providing an uneven surface, which proves more treacherous when wet or icy. Add to this the often dimly lit and desolate nature of these stretches, and it is easy to imagine a sinister figure stalking the shadows, waiting for an unsuspecting victim. One of the first incidents believed to have been the work of the pusher was the death of Tony Scanlon in 2007. He lived in the east of the city, close to the 38,000-seat stadium that had been constructed to host the 2002 Commonwealth Games, but is now home to Manchester City Football Club. In the years leading up to the Commonwealth Games, East Manchester was considered to be one of the most deprived areas of the city, and it was hoped that the Games would bring new investment and regeneration to an area that had been in decline since the closure of the Bradford Colliery in 1968. A mine which had been in operation for over 300 years, which once stood on the site upon which the new stadium has been built. In the shadow of the stadium gently flows the Ashton Canal, another relic of Manchester's industrial past, now utilised primarily for recreational pursuits. It was here, not far from the stadium in March 2007, that the body of 48-year-old Tony Scanlon would be found. He lay in just 6 inches of water, fully clothed, and was lying in the fetal position. The area in which he was found was an isolated stretch with no lighting, surrounded by wasteland and derelict buildings. It was not a place one would like to frequent during daylight, and would certainly avoid completely at night. An investigation into what led to his death resulted in the police concluding that Tony was intoxicated, with the post-mortem finding he was 4 times over the drink-drive limit. This led to the theory that Tony had decided to take a shortcut along the towpath sometime around midnight after leaving a friend's home. However, his inebriated state had caused him to lose his balance, resulting in him falling into the canal. The investigation was therefore concluded, with it being determined that there were no suspicious circumstances surrounding his death. However, his family disagree with this finding, referring to a number of factors to support their belief that there was more to his death, highlighting that the 48-year-old had bruising and a laceration to the side of his head, with the suggestion that these injuries had been caused by someone else. Speaking to the Manchester Evening News, his sister Sharon stated, "I think he was either chased or pushed. I think he could well have been the victim of the pusher. I certainly wouldn't rule it out. My brother knew the canal like the back of his hand. He used to go fishing there all the time, but he was frightened of his own shadow. There's no way he would have taken a shortcut at that time of night on his own. As far as I'm concerned, somebody chased him or pushed him. No one will ever tell me any different. There's no money on him. He could have been mugged." Sharon reinforced this belief by stating that her brother was in possession of £100. However, this was never found on his person when his body was recovered from the water. His family also referred to Tony's relationship with alcohol, stating that he was a seasoned drinker, and his consumption of 6 cans of beer that night would not have adversely affected him. During the inquest into the death, the coroner Nigel Meadows stated, quote, extensive police inquiries have failed to reveal any suspicious circumstances or witnesses to the incident itself. At the close of the inquest, the coroner declared an open verdict, leaving Tony's family with unanswered questions. Sharon argues that despite the claims that the police conducted a thorough investigation, she spoke to potential witnesses who were never questioned by the police. Sharon told the Manchester Evening News that a couple of days after Tony's death, she had a conversation with a resident who lived near the scene. They told her that they had heard an argument between a man and a woman at around the time police believed Tony entered the water, leading her to question whether this was a vital clue to help explain what happened to her brother. The unanswered questions surrounding the death of Tony have resulted in his death becoming one of the first to be connected to the alleged pusher. Whatever the truth is, it is clear that the unknown circumstances of his demise have continued to haunt his family. 4 years after Tony's death, Nathan Tomlinson would become one of 400 individuals who drowned in the UK in 2010, and tragically subsequent deaths would follow the same pattern of circumstances. On the 17th December 2010, Nathan Tomlinson had headed into Manchester city centre to attend a works Christmas party. He joined his colleagues at the Mitre Bar, which sits nestled opposite the historic Sinclair Oyster Bar. Apparently, at some point during the evening, Nathan was slapped across the face by a woman he was talking to. However, other than this encounter, the 21-year-old seemed to be having a good night and was in high spirits when he prepared to leave, with one partygoer recalling Nathan talking about how he was looking forward to Christmas. A thin blanket of snow lay on the ground as Nathan made his way out of the bar at around 10:15 that evening. Heading left out of the bar, Manchester Cathedral stood before him, with its tower coming into view as he took another left onto the alleyway known as Cathedral Yard, which ran alongside the majestic building. It is at this point that Nathan is captured on security cameras, jumping down from the sandstone wall that encloses the cathedral's grounds. Nathan found himself on Victoria Street, which he followed until it joined with Deansgate, one of the main thoroughfares through the city. During the day, it is bustling with crowds of shoppers, but when the shop lights are extinguished, the crowds disperse, with only the odd straggler and small groups people to be seen. About 3 minutes after leaving the cathedral grounds, Nathan took a right onto Blackfriars Street, where he proceeded over Blackfriars Bridge, which crosses the River Irwell. From here he headed down a set of steps which led to the riverbank. The paved pathway was bordered by the river to his right and several blocks of apartment buildings on the left. Once again he was picked up on CCTV fitted to one of these buildings, and police were able to track his movements utilising a number of cameras, as well as information from a couple of eyewitnesses. One person who encountered Nathan that night was a bus driver, who recalled the 21-year-old asking how to get to Stockport, to which the bus driver advised that he would need to head to get a train from Piccadilly train station, which was about 1 mile to the east. Following this interaction, things start to go wrong for Nathan, as the next time he is seen, he is walking westwards towards Salford Cathedral. This has led to questions as to whether he had become lost and was trying to find his way back towards the city. The next sighting of Nathan is while walking along Adelphi Street, which runs parallel to Manchester city centre. At the time, this road was quite desolate, bordered by stretches of wasteland where old mills once stood. If he had continued along this route, he would have passed the student accommodation buildings for Salford University, before the road is intersected by Blackfriars Road, where if he had turned right, it would have led him back towards Manchester city centre. For some reason, however, Nathan turned left onto a side road prior to him reaching the student blocks. Why he chose this route is unknown, but the final sighting of Nathan is of him sprinting towards a footbridge which crosses the River Irwell. This raises the question, why was he running? Was he trying to stay warm? It was, after all, the coldest December in the UK for 100 years. Or was he running because he thought he would miss his train, possibly the last one of the night, which would have left him stranded? Or there is another possibility. Was he fleeing from someone? Although no one else is seen on the CCTV footage, this doesn't rule out the possibility that he may have been attacked and he had managed to lose his pursuer. Nathan headed over the footbridge away from the camera, and this was the last sighting of the 21-year-old. 2 days later, on the 19th of December, it became apparent that Nathan was missing. But the family had a hard time convincing the police, with his mum Tina recalling, quote, "Nathan was a young male. That was their attitude. He's probably wrapped around the arms of a young woman." A week after he had gone missing, the police announced that they were extremely concerned for the 21-year-old. Detective Chief Inspector Pete Giles stating, quote, "It is almost a week since Nathan was last seen, and the police, like the family, are extremely concerned for his welfare. We are making extensive inquiries to trace him and establish his movements on the night he went missing, and I am very keen to hear from anyone who can help us piece this together." This statement was preceded with a plea, not only for anyone who had seen Nathan to come forward, but a request for Nathan to contact them directly. As Christmas passed and 2011 began, police divers were seen searching the River Irwell, but failed to find any trace of the missing 21-year-old. By the second week of January, police released images of the CCTV footage of Nathan's last known movements, with DCI Giles advising, quote, "This is a tragic case of a young man with a bright future going missing. Our indications are that he was simply trying to get home and got lost. From day one, we have carried out a number of inquiries to trace Nathan and used a wide range of resources. Unfortunately, due to the time of year and other events in the news, Nathan's disappearance may have not attracted the attention we expected it to. We have reached the point where, while we have an idea of where Nathan went after he was last seen by friends, all the initial lines of inquiry to trace him have been exhausted." Another month would pass before Nathan's fate would be known, when someone jogging alongside the River Irwell spotted a body floating in the water, not far from the bridge where Nathan was last seen crossing over. A statement released to the press by the police concluded they did not consider Nathan Tomlinson's death to be suspicious, and due to the length of time he had been in the water and the inability to explain how the fit and healthy 21-year-old had ended up in the river, a coroner would record an open verdict. During an inquest into his death held in January 2013, pathologist Naomi Carter told the court Nathan had most likely drowned the night he vanished. It was also suggested that he wasn't found sooner because he had likely become tangled up in some debris. The coroner overseeing the inquest criticised the flaws in the initial police investigation, criticising officers for failing to, quote, "do the basics," and not fully appreciating Nathan's vulnerability at the time of his disappearance. There are so many unresolved issues surrounding Nathan's death. Why was he heading in the wrong direction? Had he become lost, or was he meeting someone? When he was found, Nathan's coat, wallet and phone was missing, leading some to speculate he may have been the victim of a mugging. However, could his belongings have simply been caught in the current and floated away? The most important question is, how did he end up in the water on that cold winter's night? Had he slipped and fallen, or was he pushed? Unfortunately, the 2 months his body was submerged have meant that vital evidence which could have helped answer this question have been lost, leaving it up to debate. For his family, there are many unknowns surrounding Nathan's death, which have only been exacerbated by the coroner leaving an open verdict, which adds to the speculation that this death may have been due to foul play. To understand why a coroner would come to this decision, it is important to understand the legal guidelines to when an open verdict is permitted. These guidelines state that, quote, "An open verdict is thus only to be used in the last resort if there is insufficient evidence to enable the coroner or the jury to reach any other conclusion." This suggests that in the case of Nathan Tomlinson, there was just not enough evidence to help determine what had actually happened to the 21-year-old. And the fact that his body had been in the water for approximately 2 months would have made it difficult to determine the key factors, such as time, place, and cause of death, meaning it was impossible to come to any solid conclusion. The open verdict can understandably lead to speculation of foul play. However, if Nathan had accidentally fallen into the water, he would not have been alone, as in 2011 there were 87 fatalities in the country in which an individual had entered a body of water while partaking in another activity such as cycling or running. Incidentally, the most common cause of death by drowning in the UK is when someone accidentally falls into a body of water. For instance, in September 2011, 39-year-old Catherine Sharman had been cycling on the canal towpath not far from Manchester United football stadium, which lies to the west of the city, when it is believed she fell into the water. In 2012, the inquest into her death would rule her passing to be accidental, with the coroner going on to state poor condition of the towpaths was a contributing factor in her death. This led to the improvements of the canal side paths along this section of the canal to make them safer for pedestrians and cyclists. There has been nothing to suggest that Catherine's death was anything other than a tragic accident, and it stands to demonstrate how easily someone can end up in the water, even without the added elements of poor lighting, drink or drugs. But when these factors come into play, it can lead to an individual being in a very vulnerable and sometimes dangerous situation. And sometimes it is the individual themselves that are vulnerable due to mental health issues, as was found to be the case with a man called Robert, whose body was pulled from the Manchester Ship Canal in March of 2011. Following the discovery of his remains, police appealed for help to trace Robert's last known movements, with Detective Sergeant Dave Chambers from Stretford CID issuing a statement, quote, "We believe Robert frequented the Shude Hill and Oldham Street area of Manchester, and I would urge anyone who saw him between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. on Friday, March the 11th, to contact us as soon as possible." Understandably, his family are upset and want to know the circumstances that led to Robert's body being found in the canal. A subsequent inquest would reveal that 51-year-old Robert had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital as a teenager, and he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. As an adult, Robert kept to himself and was known to use drugs, which would have added to the complexity of his condition. He was, however, monitored by mental health workers who testified at the inquest, with one advising that the patient often expressed that he heard voices commanding him to harm himself or others. Patricia Carruthers stated, quote, "He said sometimes he was commanded to jump into things or harm himself, but he said he had developed ways to counter these thoughts, such as listening to music. The voices would last for a few hours, every few weeks, so he'd take himself to bed to listen to music. There was no concern that his mental health was deteriorating." In concluding the inquest, the coroner stated, quote, "I accept the medical cause of death was drowning, but there's just no evidence to explain what happened to him or how he came to be in the canal. In view of that, I'm going to record an open verdict." Once again, an open verdict would leave unanswered questions and leave the door open for speculation, although it is likely the coroner's verdict was simply due to the fact that she was unable to categorically confirm that Robert had entered the water with the intention of ending his own life. As I conducted my research, a pattern began to emerge with regards to many of the drowning deaths that have occurred in the city over the years. The common threads that link many of these cases being primarily the age, gender, and activity of the individual at the time of their death. According to a report into the deaths that had occurred since 2007 compiled by the Manchester Water Partnership, quote, "An overwhelming number of these drownings happened during the hours of darkness. These individuals, all bar two, were men, and inebriation played a part in a significant portion of the events that led to their deaths." This was the case for 20-year-old Gurdeep Haya, who had travelled to the city from West Bromwich with the intention of celebrating the New Year with his friends. Gurdeep was last seen by a taxi driver who had collected the 20-year-old from outside Sankey's nightclub in the city centre. At around 2:30 on the 2nd of January, the driver proceeded to take his fare to Rush Home, an area in the south of Manchester. However, before reaching the requested destination, Gurdeep asked the driver to drop him off a few streets away. The driver obliged, and his passenger paid the fare and exited the vehicle. This would be the last time anyone would see or hear from the 20-year-old. It wouldn't be until 8 days later that Gurdeep's body would be found in the River Medlock. 2 miles away from where he was last seen alive. It was concluded that there was no suspicious circumstances surrounding his death, but it is still unknown what occurred after he exited the taxi that night, nor can it be stated how and where he ended up in the water. Gurdeep's case could arguably be added to the many stories of people who find themselves falling into waters in cities and towns around the world. It doesn't take much for someone, after consuming alcohol, to become disorientated and find themselves lost in an area they are unfamiliar with. Many waterways are poorly lit or have uneven footpaths running alongside them, meaning it would be easier for an individual to trip or lose their balance and end up in the water. It is also not uncommon that during the winter months, fog banks can form over these stretches of water, concealing the danger ahead. Once an individual has entered the water, many factors can lead to them drowning. They may hit their head, resulting in loss of consciousness, sustain an injury which renders them unable to maintain movement. There are also many hazards under the water, such as objects on which a person can become tangled, for instance discarded shopping trolleys. The side of the waterway can also cause an obstacle to an individual being able to climb out safely, with often steep or slippery surfaces and a lack of ladders or other safety equipment. Of all the factors facing someone who ends up in a river or canal, it is the water itself that poses the greatest risk, with often freezing temperatures or strong currents just below the surface. Even the most competent swimmer can find themselves in danger, becoming weighed down by sodden clothes. Cramp can quickly set in, resulting in the person being unable to stay afloat. Although many of the cases I have covered can be explained away as accidents, the case of 21-year-old David Plunkett is particularly haunting. David had attended a music event at the Daytona indoor go-karting track. He had left the venue and had made a phone call to his mother, and this interaction would lead to the rise in speculation that there was more to his death. David had travelled to Salford by coach with his friend Michael to attend a music event at a secret location. Upon arriving at the venue, the Daytona Indoor Racing Centre, David and his friend were handed 6 tokens to allow them to get free drinks at the bar. The almost 6-foot-tall, dark-haired student, with his thin sideburns and silver-framed glasses, seemed to be enjoying his evening, only pausing briefly to send a text to his girlfriend. However, from here things take a turn for the worse. David began to feel unwell, to the extent that he was escorted from the venue by security. Not only was he removed from the event, but he was separated from his friend, in a place he was unfamiliar with. At 1:30 a.m, his parents, Anne and Mike, received a phone call at their home in Halifax from David's friend Michael. He told Anne that he was worried about David, explaining that the two had become separated and he'd been unable to contact her son. Anne reassured Michael that she would try to call David herself. She attempted and failed 3 times, yet the 4th call was answered. But over the next 10 minutes, the mother's concerns grew for her son. She recalled the harrowing phone call, quote, "We rang, and when David answered he was incoherent. There was no noise in the background, and it struck me he was on his own. 10 minutes into the phone call, he started screaming. He was howling and yelling. It was horrendous." Anne would later describe the horrific cries that still haunt her, stating, "It was an unearthly howl. I had never heard anything like it before. The scream was so sudden and came out of nowhere. He was swearing, and he used words I have never heard him use before." Unable to get information out of their only child regarding his location or well-being, the parents called 999 on another phone and put their son on loudspeaker. The call would later be described by both parents and the dispatcher as harrowing and disturbing. They helplessly heard David screaming and howling in an unearthly manner. The call continued until 4:30 in the morning, before the line cut off. According to the Daily Star, which was the first paper to raise the idea of the Manchester pusher, the phone call between the parents, 999 and David, was not recorded by the dispatcher, who lamented this major error which had forced her to leave her job. It is this call that would spark speculation regarding David's death. Unfortunately, it was difficult for the police to locate where the 21-year-old had been during the call, and it was only through phone records that they were able to narrow down his location to the area of Salford Quays. Once a key point on the Manchester Ship Canal, it is now a popular leisure centre with shops, a museum and various bars. Police were also able to find witnesses who had seen David on the night he disappeared, with them being notified that the 21-year-old had been escorted out of the music venue after he became unwell. And doorman recalled that upon being ejected from the site, David was witnessed vomiting. Wanting to narrow down where David went after being removed from the venue, Chief Inspector Gil Mellor urged those who attended the event to come forward. David came to Manchester for a night out, and there has been no trace of him since. We know there were more than 3,000 people at the event in Manchester, and I now need to speak with anyone who was at Trafford Park on Saturday night and remembers seeing anyone matching David's description at the end of the evening. Tragically, within a week after this plea, David's body was recovered from the Manchester Ship Canal, close to the Imperial War Museum. In order to ascertain his cause of death, a post-mortem was carried out, which revealed that David's blood alcohol was recorded as being more than 4 times the drink-drive limit, which in England is 35 milligrams. The pathologist, however, added that this amount is lower than it would have been the night David disappeared, and the report concluded that David's cause of death was likely drowning. The subsequent inquest, David's friend Michael Vittis testified regarding the nature of the event they had attended, advising that it was being held at a secret location and that he and David had travelled for an hour from Leeds in order to attend. Michael claimed that David was escorted from the venue after the 21-year-old had collapsed and vomited. Michael claimed that David was not given any first aid, nor was he directed back to the coach that they had arrived on. Speaking of David's behaviour that night, his father, Mike Plunkett, told the inquiry about his last interaction with his son, within claiming that, quote, he sounded spaced out. He didn't sound drunk, more like his drink had been spiked. He was under the influence of another substance that evening, but knowing David, I don't think that he would have self-administered. He was very responsible. David's friends agreed with Mike Plunkett's thoughts regarding the 21-year-old's drinks being spiked, with them highlighting that David was acting completely out of character, with the usual happy drunk being aggressive and quick-tempered. Another person who had encountered David that night claimed that he was confrontational and had tried to start a fight, behaviour which goes completely against his usual happy and friendly demeanour. However, contrary to other statements, Anthony Steele, a door supervisor, told the inquest that David was quite drunk, to the point of losing his balance. Mr. Steele continued, "We picked the lad up and he was laughing and saying what a great time he was having and what a great night it was. We said he had to leave because he had had enough to drink. He didn't argue and we guided him to the entrance. The lad shook our hands and thanked us. He was very friendly." The inquest wasn't able to determine how David ended up in the canal. However, they were advised by the pathologist, Dr. John Rutherford, that there was a high probability that he had died from drowning, and that he found no evidence that the 21-year-old had been a victim of a physical assault. Before delivering a verdict on David's death, Coroner John Pollard stated that he wished to take a closer look at the events holders and their handling of David on the night of his disappearance. The event itself had been organised by Budweiser, and allegations had been made that, although there was supposedly a drinks limit, 3 drinks were available throughout the night. There were also concerns in how David was handled when he became ill, with no one assessing his well-being or administering any first aid. He was allowed to walk away from the premises, a situation the coroner wanted to understand why and how this had happened. A year after David's death, the inquest was concluded, with his demise being recorded as an accidental death, a verdict Mike and Anne find bitterly disappointing, primarily because of that last phone call which suggested there was so much more to his death. The coroner, John Pollard, did however criticise the events holders, Budweiser, pointing out that given how vulnerable and unwell David had become that night, the event had a duty of care to offer him help, rather than just ejecting the 21-year-old onto the streets. The coroner clarified that, quote, There is a very clear and demonstrable difference between those who are fighting or possessing and dealing drugs compared with those who are simply intoxicated. The latter group need help rather than ejection. David's parents echoed the coroner's sentiments, calling for those who host such events to consider the safety of the attendees, with Anne stating, quote, "Anyone organising such an event with over 2,000 young people with free alcohol in an isolated place should take adequate precautions to secure the safety of the guests." Our son was an invited guest of Budweiser to a mystery venue 50 miles from home, with guaranteed travel home. That did not happen. Anne was also critical of the manner in which the police handled her son's case, voicing her frustration, quote, "Someone is responsible for David's death. The police investigation was unacceptable. It was a case of a young man, too much to drink, falls into the canal, end of story. But so many important factors were ignored, and there were versions of events that simply did not add up." During her comments, Anne highlighted that her son's last phone call failed to be recorded by the emergency dispatcher, apparently because the tape recorder stopped working. She also claimed that despite the police saying they performed an extensive search of the quayside, it was her own brother who would find David's mobile phone lying on the ground close to the water's edge. Anne concluded that, quote, "The whole case leaves more questions than answers. He could have been attacked. He could have had his drink spiked. Anything could have happened." It is these many unknowns that allow for speculation. However, in David's case, there is the added dimension of the phone call, which leaves many wondering, was he being attacked? Maybe that's why his screams sounded like he had been startled, because the person had caught him off guard. Or, in his disorientation, had he fallen into the water and the unearthly sounds were him trying to get to safety? If this was the case, why did his parents not hear a splash as he entered the water, which would have occurred given that the drop was approximately 10 feet? And why didn't they hear the thrashing as he tried to stay afloat? Another mystery concerns his mobile. If he was holding his phone, why did he end up in the water yet his phone was found on the quayside? Given all these factors, it is understandable why David's death has been suggested as a possible pusher case. 8 years after David's death, another man in his early 20s would also be found deceased in the same area of the Manchester Ship Canal. Christopher Brainey was the son of Stuart and Jane, with whom he lived in the village of Timperley, which lies to the southwest of Manchester city centre. On the 29th of June 2012, Christopher accompanied a group of friends to a Stone Roses concert in Heaton Park, Manchester. Together they travelled into the city centre, arriving at Shude Hill metro station, and upon alighting the tram, the friends headed to an adjacent car park, where they concealed some shoes as they were wearing Wellington boots and knew they would need to change their footwear if they wanted to visit some bars in the city after the concert. The friends made their way to the gig, which was being held at the large 600-acre park that lies to the north of the city. Joining over 70,000 fans, they enjoyed the atmosphere of the show. Just prior to the close of the event, Christopher realised that his phone was missing, which would cause issues later when he and his friends left the concert at 11:30 that night. This would be the last time the companions would see the slim 5'7" 22-year-old with his short brown hair, dressed in a dark blue top and maroon trousers. As they exited the park, they became separated by the crowds, and were unable to contact Christopher or find him amongst the thousands of people. And when Christopher failed to return home, he was reported missing by his concerned parents. Over the following days, a large-scale search was conducted, initially focused around the 600-acre expanse of Heaton Park, which was a difficult task, due to the area having 4 lakes and numerous woodlands. However, as this line of inquiry was being explored, information came to light that Christopher had been seen heading to the park and ride facility at Bawley Park, which was around 1.5 miles away from his last known location. This caused police to widen their search area, and a public appeal was made by Detective Chief Inspector Melanie Linton, who told the press, "We believe Chris may have used the park and ride facilities at Bawley Park, Hayward Old Road, Middleton. There were dozens of coaches in the car park with destinations all over the country. Chris could have got onto any one of these coaches. Did you see him or speak to him?" Accompanying the official appeals, the power of social media would also play a key role in Christopher's case, with over 120,000 people joining a Facebook group dedicated to finding him. Through this page, a rally was organised which was held in Manchester city centre, where flyers were handed out to generate leads. The Stone Roses also used their website to appeal for people to come forward with information, with a statement requesting, quote, "Please look at his photo and try to think, did you see him at the concert or afterwards? Do you know if he used the park and ride facility? Did you see him talking to anyone?" As tips began to flood in, police were able to start piecing together Christopher's movements that night. However, it would only be after his body was found that they were able to form a complete picture. Following the discovery of his body, investigators ascertained that he had left the park after the concert and had walked the half-an-hour journey to the park and ride at Bowley Park. They were initially concerned he could have caught a coach to anywhere in the country, which was heightened when his phone was found to be 200 miles away in Edinburgh. However, after learning that he had lost his phone earlier in the evening, and the discovery of CCTV footage of Christopher in Manchester city centre, this refocused search efforts. Investigators were able to track the 22-year-old using the vast network of cameras in the city centre, through which they ascertained that Christopher had caught a bus from Bowley Park back to the Shoredale metro station before returning to the adjacent car park where he had concealed his shoes earlier that day. From here, he is seen making his way through various streets and alleyways, primarily walking past bars and pubs he often visited with his friends, suggesting he was maybe hoping to connect with them, although he doesn't seem to enter any of the venues or interact with anyone along the route. He makes his way past groups of revellers, walking close to the Mitre Bar where Nathan Tomlinson had spent his last night alive. Christopher approaches Deansgate, partially following the same route that had been taken by Nathan. Their routes differ on Blackfriars Road. Nathan would continue on over the road bridge and take steps down to the banks of the River Irwell, whereas Christopher took a left onto St Mary's Parsonage, which runs parallel with Deansgate. Less than 100 metres down this quiet road, the 22-year-old is captured on CCTV turning right into a passageway which leads between a block of apartments and an office building. The little alleyway only leads to the rear of the offices, and a 4-foot railing creates a barrier, beyond which is roughly a 40-foot drop into the River Irwell. The last person to see Christopher was a man who lived in an apartment which overlooked this walkway. He described an individual, matching Christopher's description, sitting with his back to the railings on the night the 22-year-old went missing. At 9:30 a.m. on the 9th of July, 2 weeks after his disappearance, Christopher's body was found in the Manchester Ship Canal, in roughly the same area as David Plunkett. A post-mortem carried out by Naomi Carter found that Christopher had a number of injuries, including contusions on his face and a fractured cheekbone. However, there were no bruising around these wounds, suggesting they were sustained after death. It was also revealed that toxicology results showed a mixture of alcohol and ecstasy in Christopher's bloodstream, which Dr. Carter acknowledged would have been a factor when considering how the 22-year-old ended up in the water, but it was not the cause of his death. After carrying out the post-mortem, the coroner was unable to conclusively determine how Christopher had died. At the inquest, Dr. Carter theorised that there were two possible explanations for how Christopher had ended up in the river. Either he had climbed over the railings from where he had jumped or fallen. Alternatively, an unidentified individual caused him to plummet 40 feet into the water below. This second option was disputed by Detective Inspector Deborah Oakes, who pointed out that there was only one way in and out of the passageway that Christopher had entered. And after footage recovered from the camera which monitored this entrance was reviewed, it was concluded that Christopher was the only person to access the area, and no one else came and went in the hours before or after he did. Detective Oakes also pointed out that having reviewed all the footage of Christopher's journey that night, she formed the opinion that he did not appear to be adversely affected by alcohol or drugs. Upon drawing the inquest to a close, Deputy Coroner Joanne Kersley found that given all the evidence presented, she was unable to say how Christopher had ended up in the water. She turned to his devastated parents and stated, "I'm sorry. I can't answer the one question you want me to answer." She went on to state that she was aware that Christopher had suffered from mild anxiety 2 years earlier. However, all accounts and evidence suggested that he was content, leaving her to surmise that he hadn't taken his own life. Nor was there anything to implicate anyone else in his death. There was only one verdict left open to Miss Kersley as she concluded the inquest. Due to the inability to answer vital questions surrounding how and why Christopher had died, she recorded an open verdict. Speaking briefly after the inquest, Christopher's father, Stuart, spoke fondly of his son, stating Chris's death has left a massive void in our family. He had charm, wit, and was a joy to be with. He was a perfect son. I've personally seen the location where Christopher probably entered the water, and to me it is clear that his chances of survival would have been very minimal. Having fallen 40 feet into the river, the impact of hitting the water, combined with the cold temperatures, would have likely affected his ability to swim, and given the steep sides of the buildings around him, his escape routes would have been very scarce. His body, most likely, was taken by the current of the river until it joined the Manchester Ship Canal, where he would later be found. Just 6 months after Christopher's death, another family would lose their son to the unforgiving waters of the Manchester canals. For any parent, seeing your child leave home to attend university is always a bittersweet moment. The immense pride is tinged with sadness, but ultimately, all a parent wants for their offspring is for them to be happy and healthy. For Suvik Pal's mother, Mahua, and her husband, Santanu, seeing him leaving for university was particularly poignant, given that he would be travelling from Bangalore in India to study at the Manchester Metropolitan University. Not only would he be 500 miles away from home, but they were naturally concerned about how he would handle life in a different country, and the financial implications that went along with it. Despite their reluctance, Suvik was determined that he wanted to study product design at the university's Science and Engineering department. His father recalling, quote, "We finally decided to go with what our son wanted, and he was so happy. He worked hard and settled in quickly." The 18-year-old moved to the city in the autumn of 2012 and got on well with his flatmates, who stated that he was a very popular person who had really taken to student life. He wanted to enjoy everything that went along with it. This apparently included experimenting with drink and drugs. As well as studying hard, Suvik got a part-time job working at Manchester United Stadium selling refreshments, a role that allowed him to be close to the sport he loved, having enjoyed playing football since he was a child. Given how well he had adjusted to student life, it was no surprise that Suvik was made a student ambassador, helping others to find their feet and promoting the university to future students. However, this promising young man's life would come to a tragic end on the 31st of December 2012. Suvik had prepared to celebrate the new year, having inquired last-minute tickets to a music event being hosted in the city. Donning a pair of grey chinos, a denim long-sleeve shirt, and navy blue leather boots, he began drinking vodka prior to leaving his flat to attend the event with his friends. Suvik and his friends clambered into a taxi and headed to the Warehouse Project event, held at one of the largest nightclub venues in this country. Housed in an imposing storage warehouse located between the Manchester Ship Canal and the Bridgewater Canal, this once expansive building was intended for the storage and distribution of goods via the two waterways. Constructed in the 1920s, the building fell into decline, as roads made it quicker and more economical to transport goods using lorries. A large proportion of the site was destroyed by a fire. However, what remains was still an impressive tribute to its industrial heritage, with the property being acquired and refurbished to be used as a venue for hosting various events in 2012. The building, located just off Trafford Wharf Road, is less than a mile from the Daytona indoor racing track, which David Plunkett had visited, and would host over 3,000 people. The New Year's Eve event saw the venue at full capacity, something his friend Charlotte Wilson said she was concerned about, due to the fact Suvik had not been clubbing prior to coming to the UK, and she was worried he'd be overwhelmed by the scale of the place. Quote, "It is such a large, intimidating venue, because it's very busy, but he was very enthusiastic about it. Despite his friend's concerns, Suvik seemed to be in good spirits and appeared excited about this new experience. Another friend, Gemma Hale, recalled that while travelling to the venue, Suvik had taken ecstasy, and she claimed that he had taken more once inside the venue. His friends claimed that despite trying to stay together within the large and crowded building, they found themselves separated from Suvik at around 10 p.m. An hour later, the 18-year-old was ejected from the club due to reports he had become aggressive, and amid suspicion he had been taking drugs on the premises. He did send a text to his friends advising that he had been kicked out and told them he was trying to get back in. This would be the last time his friends would have contact with him. It would be 2 days later that Suvik's parents would learn that he was missing. They were contacted by Greater Manchester Police, who had only been able to acquire their phone number through Facebook, as the university administration offices were closed for the 2-week festive holiday. Despite the caller speaking Hindu and trying desperately to explain that Suvik had not been seen since New Year's Eve, his father struggled to process what he was being told, even wondering if the call was some sort of prank. The caller, however, reiterated that Suvik had been reported missing by his flatmate, who had become concerned when the 18-year-old had failed to return to the apartment following their night out. This had led to a number of searches being conducted around the area of Suvik's last known location, including the nearby Bridgewater Canal, which had proven fruitless. As part of the police efforts to understand what may have happened to Suvik, his parents were asked about the last time they had heard from him. His father would state in an interview that he had last spoken to his son a couple of hours prior to the last time Suvik had been seen. Santanu recalled the conversation, quote, "He was the first person we called to wish Happy New Year. We were at a friend's place, ringing in 2013. Suvik was also getting ready to celebrate. It wasn't 2013 in Manchester yet. His mother had her usual conversation with him about eating right and look after himself. I guess all mothers do that. We hung up saying we would call him on the 3rd of January, his birthday. Instead of calling Suvik to wish him a happy 19th birthday, his father spent the 3rd of January desperately trying to find a way to get from Bangalore to Manchester as quickly as possible. He would arrive in the city on the 6th of January. Upon his arrival, Santanu wanted to do everything in his power to discover what had happened to his son, starting by retracing Suvik's last known movements. For 3 weeks he sought answers, acquiring information from the police and Suvik's friends. The father on a desperate quest to piece it all together in order to make sense of his son's disappearance. Speaking in an interview following his son's death, Santanu retold what he had been advised by the police at the time, stating, quote, "According to the police, Suvik was asked to leave the venue before midnight and was not with his friends. According to the bouncers, he was trying to enter a ladies' toilet and breaking a one-way rule for entry and exit. This differed from other accounts that claimed that Suvik had been ejected from the venue because he had become aggressive, a statement that would later be clarified during a press conference, at which a detective told those gathered, quote, "Suvik's eviction from the nightclub was a misunderstanding, and there was no indication that he was misbehaving or he was drunk." Santanu decided that he needed to see the venue where his son had been that night, and so he made his way to the warehouse project. He wanted to understand the layout, particularly how the one-way system worked, and where the ladies' toilets were located that Suvik had allegedly tried to enter. Santanu recalled that, quote, "One notices a ladies' toilet sign only once one is almost in front of the door." Santanu continued by claiming that someone could easily walk through the next door along, believing there would be the men's toilets. However, this door also led to the ladies. He told the interviewer, "It was a bit confusing, and I can imagine it would have been worse for Suvik, because on New Year's Eve, the place was jam-packed." As the police continued to conduct their investigations, Santanu was determined to play his part in finding his son. He walked the streets of Manchester, handing out flyers and asking people he met if they had seen his son. Meanwhile, the police were working on a lead that an Asian male had been seen near one of the canal locks on the night of the 18-year-old's disappearance. They had drained that section of the Bridgewater Canal, hoping to find clues. Forensic teams did recover 4 mobile phones and a wristwatch. None of these items belonged to the missing student. Despite these many dead ends, Santanu stated, quote, "I was always hopeful, because if they hadn't found a body, then there was a chance of my son being alive." As well as trying to stay positive, Santanu attempted to make sense of what could have happened to his son, trying to rule out the idea that he could have drowned. Father recalled, quote, "Suvik was a good swimmer and spent many summers in Bangalore swimming with his friends. He had also spent £150 on a gym membership and was in good physical shape. How could he have drowned? Moreover, it is static water, a man-made canal, not more than 6 feet deep. There is a clear embankment used by joggers. It's not like one could have slipped into the water. Also, the area is very well lit. Nothing was adding up." In Suvik's case, it is CCTV footage that would be the most haunting, and lead to a series of questions that have not been answered. In a video showing the area outside the warehouse project, 2 males, one appearing to match Suvik's description, are seen talking. A few moments later, the pair are picked up on another surveillance camera, heading down towards the canal. Police believe that Suvik is then seen climbing a fence near to the water, but they're unable to confirm this as no witnesses have come forward. They have also been unable to trace the second man, who, after accompanying the person matching Suvik's description down to the canal, returned shortly after without him. 3 weeks after Suvik had gone missing, Santanu received the devastating news that a body had been found in the Bridgewater Canal, just 50 feet away from the warehouse project. He was asked to formally identify the remains and had to look upon his son's lifeless face, devoid of its cheerful countenance, and confirm that they had found Suvik. Pathologist Naomi Carter reported that there were no signs of any injuries on the 18-year-old's body, concluding that his cause of death was drowning. The police released a statement in which Detective Chief Inspector Colin Larkin concluded, "We do not believe there are any suspicious circumstances surrounding Suvik's death, and there was nothing to suggest it was anything other than a tragic accident." These statements were repeated at the subsequent inquest held in October 2013, during which Coroner Joanne Kersley recorded an open verdict, stating, quote, "Although the drugs were likely to have contributed to his behaviour, they were not the cause of his death, and despite extensive investigation, it cannot be ascertained where or how he entered the water." For Suvik's family, the verdict has brought them little comfort nor closure. At their home in Bangalore, they cherished the belongings their son had with him the night he died, including his wallet with money and identification inside, which may rule out the possibility that his death was caused during a mugging. They also have their son's wristwatch, which continues to work despite being in the water for 3 weeks. This is a source of great pain for his family, who wish that it had stopped at the time Suvik had entered the water, which could have been a vital clue. Eager to find answers, Santanu has spoken openly about the potential that his son was a victim of the pusher, particularly given that the man Suvik was last seen with has never been found. The other alternatives that the father has considered is that his son had attempted to acquire drugs that night, and the man in the CCTV had either been a dealer or posed as one in order to lure Suvik away from the club and possibly cause the student to end up in the water. Another factor in Suvik's case that baffled people is the fact that despite extensive searches of the canal, his body wasn't found for 3 weeks. When it was discovered, it was just a short distance away from where Suvik was last seen, leading people to question why had his body not been found sooner. Given the often isolated nature of the canal towpaths, they can be the ideal location for people wishing to conduct illicit activities away from prying eyes. They can also provide havens for opportunists looking for lone victims. This was the case with 40-year-old Simon Brass, who, while walking along the Rochdale Canal in the early hours of the 5th of June 2013, was set upon by 5 individuals, intent on mugging him. This gang had been stalking the towpaths around the city's northern quarter, seeking out potential targets. During the trial, this area was described as a, quote, dark, dangerous place, where the surrounding underpasses were frequented by gay men who looked for casual sexual encounters, and who in turn were preyed upon by robbers who were aware their victims would be unlikely to complain to the police. Just a few hours prior to the gang's encounter with Simon, they had committed a number of other criminal activities, the first of which took place at approximately 1 a.m, when two of the gang pretended to be police officers, stopped a man and proceeded to advise that they were going to perform a drug search, during which they stole a packet of cigarettes from his pocket. Seeing this incident unfolding, 3 men approached to intervene, 2 of whom were set upon by the gang, with one of the men having his head stamped on, while the other was pushed into the canal. While this individual attempted to climb out of the canal, his fingers were stepped on, and when the man eventually managed to escape from the water, his ordeal was not over. The gang chased him along the towpath, where he stumbled, and upon seeing him fall, the gang set upon him again, kicking him until he was unconscious. An hour and a half after this incident, the gang returned to the area seeking new victims, leading them to cross paths with Simon Brass. At the trial, the court heard that the gang, whose youngest member was just 14 at the time, had attempted to steal Simon's phone. However, this proved unsuccessful, and it was suggested by the prosecution that they pushed Simon into the canal. It was reported that the 40-year-old, upon entering the water, called out to the gang, shouting that he couldn't swim. Yet his pleas went unheeded, as the 5 individuals walked away from the scene, with one of the members allegedly stating later that he didn't help Simon because he didn't want to get wet. The gang did not cease their spree after this attack, as just a couple of minutes' walk down the towpath, they stole a mobile phone from another man. However, they were swiftly apprehended when 2 takeaways alerted police to the fact that someone had been attempting to sell mobile phones on their premises. This in turn led to the individuals being identified on CCTV and brought in for questioning, after which it didn't take long for police to connect the gang to the death of Simon, whose body was found 4 days after the attack. When Simon's body was recovered from the water, a search of his person was carried out, during which they found he had concealed his phone in his socks, suggesting that he was acutely aware of keeping his valuables out of sight while out alone. Prosecutor Mark Kellett addressed this attempt to conceal his belongings, stating, quote, "The fact that Mr. Brass had hidden his phone clearly frustrated the 5 defendants in their attempt to rob him." The gang were each found guilty of manslaughter, and during sentencing, the judge, Clement Goldstone QC, said, "Simon Brass was pushed into the canal when efforts to rob him proved unsuccessful, and who you left to die, knowing he could not swim. This was not wanton hooliganism or a prank gone wrong. He was the intended victim of a robbery." Simon's assailants received between 9 to 10 years behind bars, with the 14-year-old being ordered to be detained at a young offenders institution for 5.5 years. Simon's death at the hands of this callous gang does give one pause. How many of the supposed pusher cases could be attributed to incidents like this, where unscrupulous individuals are willing to do anything to commit a crime and get away with it? In the years since Simon's death, there continue to be reports of bodies being found in various waterways throughout the city. Some are ruled as suicides or accidental deaths, while others are recorded as unexplained. And it is these deaths that continue to fuel speculation that there is a serial killer stalking the shadows. But when the statistics of water-related deaths in Manchester are compared with those that occur in a city like Amsterdam, which also boasts numerous waterways and has a thriving nightlife, and also attracts tourists from all over the world, the statistics are fairly similar. So is the pusher real, or is that an oversimplification of the issues faced in Manchester? As discussed, people end up in the water for a variety of reasons, some accidental, some intentional, and others cannot be explained. But one of the main problems Manchester faces is how to keep individuals safe on the labyrinth of towpaths and riverbanks that crisscross the city. One family who found themselves considering the safety of Manchester's waterways were the Popes. whose 20-year-old son Charlie drowned in the Rochdale Canal while on a night out. His son's death proved to be a catalyst for Nick Pope, who, having visited the city following Charlie's death, bemoaned the risk that individuals faced. Quote, "Look around here, it's just a bloody death trap." This in reference to how close the bars and clubs were to the rivers and canals, particularly those which allowed patrons to sit drinking at tables located just a matter of feet from the water's edge. Unfortunately, these locations have not adapted to the way in which people's habits have changed. With the introduction of 24-hour licensing, binge drinking has become endemic throughout England, with individuals consuming considerably more alcohol than previous generations. It, however, is not just an issue of people's alcohol consumption, with Nick Pope also highlighting that there is a lack of key safety features in place to help prevent tragedies occurring, noting that there is a lack of barriers along the edge of the towpaths, insufficient lighting and poorly maintained walkways all contribute to creating a potentially hazardous environment. Nick Pope stated that, quote, "Where you go past the lock on Whitworth Street, the location where his son drowned, it is completely unguarded, pitch black and dangerous. There's no throw lines, there's no rubber rings, there's no way of getting out. If there is an incident, people can at least try and save themselves or be saved. If out of a tragedy like this something good can come and prevent unnecessary deaths, that would be a result. You've got to protect people from themselves. It's not enough to say they shouldn't get drunk. These boys have been brought down to the edge of the canal and young people are going to have a drink." End quote. In an effort to improve these areas, a petition was signed by nearly 100,000 people, requesting the installation of barriers along the waterfronts. And Nick Pope has been a key driving force in the campaign, inspired by his son's attitude, which he described as Charlie being, quote, "the sort of kid who would always push for people to do the right thing." Responding to the numerous drowning deaths, the Canal and River Trust took action in 2018 by installing safety barriers, particularly along the Rochdale Canal, which runs parallel with Canal Street, the heart of the city's gay village, where numerous pubs and clubs sit along the edge of the towpath. Plans were also put in place to prevent people accessing the towpaths during the hours of darkness. These efforts seem to be working, as there were no drowning deaths reported in 2019, but despite this success, it would sadly be impossible to prevent drowning incidents in the future. Whether you believe in the existence of the pusher or not, water will always pose a very real danger. What's your thoughts on the Manchester pusher? Do you think there is a serial killer stalking the waterways of Manchester? Or have most of these deaths been just tragic accidents? Let me know on Twitter, on Facebook. And please join me next time for more It's Murder Up North.
So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.